Hold on. Where is Leanne? Okay. Good morning. I'm so pleased to be back with you today for the last day of the Reluxury talks. We have an amazing program, and I could summarize the day with we should go beyond circularity, beyond in terms of customer experience, in terms of traceability, in terms of courage. This morning we have amazing speakers, and we will start the day with Leanne KEMP from Everledger with a talk called Stop Bullshitting, the best way to build trust. Please.
That's a great introduction. Wow, okay, well, great to be here. There's been a lot of talk lately around blue ticks. They're once the coveted authenticity tick or the marker, and let's talk today in the opening part about Twitter. It was the goal of many people, many celebrities, journalists and organisations, and a badge announcing who you were or who you claimed to be. We even have a blue tick here, authenticity guaranteed. But like him or not, Elon Musk has turned the badge into a monthly charge for anyone willing to pay. It's gone from being a public verification to a pay per user, or like I say, a pay to play. And you could have a tick a month, 1 month, and then the next you could simply just leave it and walk away. And the town hall of the internet is now more a bit like an arcade. In the world we find ourselves, I ask, is the blue tick enough? And what is beyond the blue tick? What speaks louder in the 21st century to all of us today? Is it a reputable name or is it reputable deeds? The do good while doing well. So my company Everledger exists to unveil some of the most opaque and conflicted supply chains in the world. We're obsessed by it. We work in tracing diamonds and gemstones, work in luxury goods and textiles, and most importantly today around critical minerals that's driving the renewable energy infrastructure, such as solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries. I started the company in 2014. It was pretty much me in a backpack. And now we have over 4 million gemstones with complete traceability from the source of the mine right the way through to the retail network. We have about 100 people in the company with 5 operational centres, and we touch customers in 35 countries around the world. And our philosophy is actually quite simple. We want to know where something comes from, and then once its primary use fades or changes, we want to know what happens next. We started back in 2014 by tracking diamonds from the source of the mine through its extraction, cutting, polishing, and then right the way into the retail network. And we started here because the story of a diamond is a hyper-consolidated, geographically dense supply chain. And in many ways, it gives us a roadmap of an exemplar industry where it can evidence the transparency in that supply chain. Now, look, I don't like to say we're a blockchain company, as we are not a traditional bunch of crypto bros that's thinking about what we can do to tokenize stuff. But of course, we use blockchain. We use that and a whole bunch of other technologies. I liken it to a symphony of technologies that come together to enable that immutable record and that identity. And these technologies are foundational building blocks to identify authenticity, granted. But I'll let you know in a second that tech companies are rarely just about the tech. Our work isn't in the technology. Our work is in the systems enablement, the human system, and most importantly, enabling the rewiring of the economics. Quite simply, it's the alignment of values and value in a supply chain or industry that enables that change to occur. The journey we unveil is from the origin right the way through to authenticity to a life cycle, to use and reuse, and serves every part of that very complicated puzzle piece. Now, impact, of course, is another buzzword. It's thrown around these days like you never before heard. and we shouldn't diminish its significance. When I think of impact, I think of people, planet, and prosperity. And we shouldn't just be thinking about the price tag as the cost of a customer to pay, but what about the cost of the planet? Can we honestly continue to live in an abundant world where what is new is good and what is old can simply be discarded? Certainly in the West, we've been living in an age of abundance, undeniably. So much so that we're also living in a world where trash is in abundance. We've polluted the planet, the abundance through a linear economy that take, make, create, and then throw away. So now is the time we should think going beyond that blue tick. Where's the green tick? And not just a faded, barely visible watermark that amounts to little more than a greenwashing sign, but a strong and true, transparent look at the objects. So if the blue tick is a KYC, the authenticity of the company or the person, then we need a green tick for it to be the KYO, the know your object. So my argument is this: there are many companies and people with really good reputations, but equally, how do we see those reputations? Because they're often built on sand, a shifting dynamics in our societal notions. What constitutes good is really the question, and that's rapidly evolving. The more we know, quite simply, is the more we know. But it's not always the more we show. Consumers are using their voice and platforms to ask questions and are not satisfied with the answers. And practices like changing the blue tick on Twitter to a subscription service will no doubt enable that the faith further and lull us into some false hope of thinking that as long as we have the money, we control the story. So let's take another example. Carbon trading, which I'd argue now is at a turning point. One where blockchain technologies has the power to make a lasting impact. And already crypto-backed trading organisations are looking at carbon credits, and they've been heralded as a saviour by enabling transparency in the record keeping and ensuring companies and users can't double dip into that system. But when it comes to the offsetting, credits do occur multiple times. Now, after all, isn't the whole point of carbon credits where they were designed as a way to offset environmental degradation, not just a money-making adventure? There are example companies around the world that are launching public consultations to discuss this very real topic, the importance of KYC, that blue tick, yet again, on the crypto instrument or on the token holder itself. Their own blue tick, if you will, that pay to play, here it comes again. Now, with this signal, it's clear that merely tokenizing an existing system with a business as usual approach isn't going to cut any value creation. And maybe it's time we think about an entirely different system. Yep, the blue tick can stay. We need it. We need to have a KYC check. But let's open up to a green tick. One that verifies the actions, one that verifies the value creation, one that verifies the impact. So here's a thought. It's time to move away from offsetting greenhouse gas emissions to insetting them instead. And blockchain, sure, can be a technology tool that will enable it. It's a scaffolding, and it so should be. But the old market schema has proved itself to be flawed. Instead of simply recreating it with new technologies, why don't we rewrite that narrative and begin a new, decentralized, transparent system to enable that value? Today, we're standing right at a crossroad. In the next 48 hours, I'm heading into Egypt with this exact topic in largest decision makers and financiers in the world that are now financing these Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. The time is running fast to avert what is arguably a danger on the horizon. The more we use carbon credits, the more pressure we're passing on to our future selves. Corporations and industries are signing up for that net zero target and deadline. But in reality, aren't we just pushing the changes to some vague future date by promising to offset an emission that we're creating in today's world? There's hope, however, for those that instead of offsetting, we turn to insetting. The practicality of that is insetting puts the responsibility directly onto the companies that are emitting those carbon emissions. It could look like this: removing carbon from your very own supply chain or improving sustainable management practices at the source. We have a platform that traces all of Australian wool. So here's a real-world example. A wool producer, for example, could look at creating the best environment for its sheep. Rather than purchasing credits to plant trees 10,000 miles away, the diamond industry, it could be manufacturing facilities to install solar panels and wind turbines directly on the roof of their facilities rather than purchasing off a wind farm in a whole nother country or a whole nother region in India. Those that are at the forefront of retail to consumer can be that economic engine to drive those insettings. So carbon insetting is less focused on the impact of the inset themselves, but instead they're focused on driving the business value, that paradigm shift that's so desperately required. And carbon insetting can also be more appealing to companies because investing in these insetting principles and projects can make a company's supply chain more resilient and improve the quality, arguably, of its raw materials. So a stitch in time saves 9, as they say, and the future is being built today. And we know that what we do right now has an impact on tomorrow, next year, and 100 years from now. And we know that with every passing year, an extra 50 billion tonnes of carbon is spewing into our atmospheres. And we're short of changing our future selves and the generation. But humans, let's admit, we've never really been great at doing the hard work today so that tomorrow can be better. We're pretty lazy. And it might be not as sexy as carbon credits as we know today, but transparency in supply chains built around the metrics of Scope 1, 2, and most importantly, Scope 3, will have a profound effect on our collective future. Dabbling in carbon credits might feel good at the time, and afterwards, it feels a bit empty in the stomach. It's equivalent to me of eating some fast food at the corner shop. But the feeling that you get from enabling a carbon inset may not be the whole answer to the equation, but I'd wager that it would leave you with a feeling of nourishment that lingers for longer. So what if, instead of putting aside our emissions or offsetting our activities in meaningless ways, we turned inwards, using carbon insetting as the new standard to make that lasting change, and underpin that beyond the blue tick with a green tick. So I'm going to leave you with this. In the past 50 years or so, our understanding of material science has expanded exponentially. And we know how to make things better, we know how to authenticate it, we know how to make things faster and cheaper. In fact, it's a race to the bottom. But now we're in the ascendancy of climate and environment science, where it's not just enough to know the science of how we build something or what we build it out of, but we also have to measure and make accountable the impact on what it's having in our future. So I'll be back here next year, by which time I hope we don't just have a blue tick on these posters, but a green tick alongside proving that we can be good while doing well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for this amazing talk. I know you're all going and leaving for Egypt, and your words and your knowledge of this industry, but many others, it's so important to be, the link between the leaders of those worlds and the economic world. Thank you so much for being with us, and see you next year for sure.
I want the green tick.
Okay, great. Let's continue this journey with another amazing talk. Let me welcome on stage Jonscott TURCO from core3.io.
Thanks. No pressure. Stephanie's been talking me up on media and in person for a while. So I'd like to start, before I check my notes to make sure I cover the talking points. Sorry, Steph. Oh, here we go. Yeah. to tell you a little bit about my journey personally. So I started as an international business and marketing major, went to work after university, and I was super curious, as I mentioned yesterday, as to why people were behaving the way they were behaving at work, why leaders were making decisions the way they were making them, because even as a 21, 22-year-old, it just seemed counterintuitive. And I'll give you one example. My first business trip ever, back when my salary was $19,000 a year, gross, in 1991, which was a normal salary apparently back then, which is shocking. I went to my boss because my airline ticket for this trip was $13.33 to Colorado from New York for 3 days. It seemed crazy to me. So I went and asked, and travel said, well, you're not staying over on a Saturday. That used to be a thing in travel. So I went and said, what if I stay on Saturday? They said, well, it's $3.33. I went all happy with myself to my boss, and I said, if I go 1 day early, I can save the company $1,000, which was enormous money to me back then. And he looked at me like I was insane, and he goes, you're going to go on Sunday. You don't need to be there Saturday. So my first trip was first class, where I listened to Green Day, my 21-year-old self. I still listen to Green Day. And it was a very funny lesson to me as to why people behave, which was out of my control. I went back to graduate studies and really became immersed in behavior and cultures and how behaviors are so much more important than just words. I heard a great thing before, I'm not sure if she's here, where the words on the wall, someone goes, yeah, nice font. I think I'm going to use that because it's fantastic, because it's not part of the ethos of the company. So when I talk about courageous leadership, when I talk about courage in work, it tends to be a very uncomfortable conversation with leaders around the world. Everyone can talk about it. Everyone can say we want to do the right things. And when it comes down to the essential behaviors that drive culture and drive companies, the changes in behavior are very slow to come. So that's just an important piece of reality for most organizations that I work with. So since that time, I've been working around the world. I have clients thus far in more than 50 countries. Over the years, I've spoken to more than 100,000 people in different settings. And what I find interesting about the conversations are always the fact that people are wondering what steps they can take to be more effective in their leadership and to embrace culture as a courage as a cultural reality day to day. And I'll get into that a bit more now. Any questions, by the way, please feel free. This is a small, intimate group. We can actually have a good dialogue. So as I deal with clients around the world, one of the most interesting aspects of it to me is when people embrace the concept and don't follow through with the realities. And there's nothing more detrimental than that reality. So for example, I just had a call this morning with a client, and they did a massive employee survey beforehand, after COVID, about how people like to work, where they feel most effective. And I was raising the flags, jumping up and down, saying, please don't ask this question. Please don't ask this question, because the reality is, and the reality has been, they got specific feedback, and they did what they wanted anyway. So now you've given the misimpression that you care what your team has to say. So it's like me saying, do you want chicken or fish? Chicken. Great, you're having fish. So it's kind of a ridiculous example, but it's a literal example of what I dealt with this morning. So the ability to take feedback, to understand, and I love what Leanne just said about the green tick, because the ability to take your kind of personal ethos and to hire a team and to build a team that is culturally aligned and behaviorally aligned is seemingly a remedial concept for leaders, and overall a very, very difficult and challenging reality to achieve. So we have this example now accelerating, in my opinion, working in Web3 now, is that Web3 and all the associated technologies accelerate the good and accelerate the bad. So everything is happening faster. The good things amplify faster, and the bad things amplify faster as well. So our ability right now to change the conversation is incumbent upon all of us. When we talk about decentralized leadership, we talk about decentralized DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. We have to take the decentralization on all of us as well to make decisions and be responsible for our behavior in our day-to-day, because the reality is I can sit here and being on a stage, sorry, Steph, I'm getting out of the light. I can sit here, and I usually try to have a little more casual conversation, and I can talk to you all day about the reality of your decisions and your individual realities, and then you can talk about it saying, yeah, that sounds good, but my boss wants me to finish this by tomorrow, and I don't have the time or energy to fight with them about this. And then the cascading of this reality, I'll get back. The cascading of this reality is they're worried about their boss, and their boss is worried about the board, and the board's worried about the shareholders. So the cascading refrain from making something disruptive from a decision-making leadership perspective is killing organizations and cultures. Right? So when we deal with this, which I do on a daily basis, we can talk about that. You're all laughing. Hopefully that's not a play. So it's good. All right, well, that's good. I'll take that as a positive. All right, good. Yeah, for sure. But it is interesting because when you think about the motivation, so for example, I left corporate almost 15 years ago when I started my business. And now I see some things that were normal for me back then in the organizations I worked in. And I think to myself, how does that organization even exist anymore? And then you hear about quiet quitting and the Great Resignation. I wrote an article on LinkedIn you can find. It's not the Great Resignation. To me, it's the Great Why. Because people are more empowered to ask, well, why? I have a client who had an employee who asked to work from home before COVID. Ready for this? 1 day a month. And the CFO, her boss, said, there's no chance you could do your job from home 1 day a month. Fast forward 2 years later, I think she's done her job from home for 2 years almost. Okay? By all accounts, performance increased. Satisfaction increased. Guess what? She has a life. She knows her kids a little bit better. She started to jog. She feels better about herself. And now, okay, time to come back to the office. Why? And there's no answer, right? It's just, I hate to say it, I draw on my reality as a parent a lot of times, and my kids are much older. This won't work now. But just because. The because is not effectual. If you tell your employees, well, this is what you have to do. Why? Because I'm the boss. Because, well, guess what? There's tons of options. This is the thing, too, people don't understand. The options are dramatic. So the reality is, when people say, I need my employees back in the office now, I ask why. Well, we have we have the office. I just paid we have a 10-year lease on the space. We just moved, this is one of my clients, we just moved into the World Trade Center. And I said, listen, your fixed CapEx is not your employees' problem. If you want happy employees, more productive employees, more engaged employees, a culture of excellence, a culture of performance, a culture of results, you have to really think about how you're driving these realities in your organizations as opposed to more than just because I said come back, right? So I have 2 kids who are 25 and 24. I can't believe the options they have right now. My son called me a few months ago. He goes, I got a call about a job. I'm very happy. I'm not leaving my company, but get this. He said, get this. They want me to come to the office. He goes, that is a non-starter. He lives in Austin, Texas. He's like, Dad, I'm not dealing with the heat here outside, getting dressed. He goes, I want to get paid for results. So it is an interesting cultural phenomenon we're in the midst of right now. People are asking why more. People now, when we look at Web3 and all the different changes we've had meetings in spatial, we've had meetings in other metaverse. I work a lot with people who are organizing DAOs, and people say, well, DAOs are going to change the way organizations are run. Yes and no, right? I don't know any leader, not putting you on the spot, who's going to say, you know what, we should have a DAO, and we'll make decisions. Like collectively, all of us will have an equal say and an equal share, equal number of votes. I don't know any organization that's ready to take that leap right now. Are there applications? For sure. But what is a DAO? A decentralized autonomous organization. It's, I don't know, Steph, you want to give a DAO definition better than I will?
It's collective, and the more you contribute, the more you make business, for example, more you gain power in the decision making. So it's there is no leaders. You are a collective who take the decision collectively, indeed.
Like a holacracy, like the different leadership models and organizational models. Sorry, I geek out on all this stuff. So there's like all the different models of structures for organizations. And progressive leaders often say I'd like to really look at an holacracy where there's no managers, kind of like Tony Sahat at Zappos a little bit. But the reality is it's really difficult to lead organizations through many complexities in that format, in practicality. It sounds good, it's an interesting model, but in reality, it's a bit difficult. Let me check my points Stephanie wants me to address. Hold on, give me a second. Any thoughts so far? Nobody? So I think it's, so when I talk about courageous cultures, I also talk a lot about leadership behaviors. And when we talk about the risk appetite, or we talk about, like I just mentioned, creating psychological safety. I dealt with a company in France who, and I get paid to tell the truth, quite why I like my job a lot. I get on a microphone, someone makes the judgment call. Let's give this guy a microphone in front of all of the leaders in my company. And so I had a leader in France say to me, in the group, you're my top 200 people in the company. Why don't you bring me ideas? We need to innovate. We need to do this. And I'm looking around knowing the reality. And I'll use Leanne's word earlier. I clicked on my mic, and I said, I'm going to have to call bullshit right now. And so the whole place laughed nervously because the CEO had fired the last 6 people who brought him ideas he didn't like. So when you talk about creating psychological safety for your team, that's the antithesis, right? I mean, it's people are terrified to give an idea because they're afraid of the consequences if the boss doesn't like it. So creating an environment of psychological safety, and I like to say creating an environment of radical trust. You have to, especially in a world where you have people in multiple offices, in multiple cities, working different schedules, you have to be clear as a leader to set a vision that is going to empower your team to be successful, give them the autonomy to make decisions, give them the risk appetite to say, let's learn. Why did you do this? It didn't work. We can learn together and grow from it. And to be able to do that is a really critical factor in organizations, not just now, but going forward, it's accelerating a bit more. You okay? Okay. You look concerned. So I'm not sure if I'm on the light for you. So being an organizational psychologist, as I've been for many years, looking at psychological safety is critical. Looking at leadership behavioral factors, I talk to clients all the time about this. So we have ascending and descending behavioral factors in organizations and in leadership. So I'll give you an example. Fear, is it ascending or descending? Is fear an ascending or descending behavioral factor? Descending, right? If you're feeling fearful, you're going to feel as if you're going to try your best, or you're going to kind of get insular. If I say empowered, ascending or descending? Ascending. It's not rocket science, let's be clear. The reality is, though, as much as you can understand there's 15 ascending and 15 descending as I codified them, the reality is, as simple as they are to understand conceptually, practicing them and acknowledging that you may not be doing a good job is also a critical leadership factor for courageous leaders. So people often ask me, what's the most important thing you can tell a leader today? What's the most important thing they could tell their teams? And I thought about this a lot, and I still stick with this. It's the ability to embrace, I don't know. And I don't know many leaders who embrace that reality, to say, you know what, I don't know. I don't have the answer to this. Because let's look at this. The amount of information we are creating as a society, as a culture, as a world, is accelerating to the point where it is impossible for you to know everything, even about your specific area. Right? Let's just say right now we can put a pin in this moment right here, right now on the 7th of November, and you know everything previous to today. Guess what? 2 days from now, we've multiplied information, it's changed, it's accelerated, it's gone in different directions. You have to surround yourself with a team that's going to be finding out this information and trust they're going to bring you the relevant pieces of data. Right? We can't be omnipotent. I think leaders feel this tremendous fear of saying, I don't know, I don't have all the, I don't know. Let's create the solution together. It's really important that we work together to do this. Part of the reason that Core 3, in my branding, the CO is capitalized, is because it's a cooperative, co-developed, collective reality that we're all trying to do. And 3 is for Web3, because I'm pivoting dramatically into this, because the decision-making hierarchies, the teams, the decentralized nature of work, the way the metaverse is going to play into this, the way that DAOs are playing into this, the way that all the different associated technologies that are yet to be determined, the NFTs, soul-bound tokens, all these different things that are coming into play are changing the entirety of leadership and courageous leadership for us. Any questions or thoughts? See a few heads shaking yes and no. Nothing? Okay. So that's really the gist of what I wanted to get at today. Let me see, I'll make sure I have Stephanie's pieces here. Yeah, we talk also about ROI. We've talked about this a lot. And one of my friends in Dubai, Sharad Argowal, says, we did a webinar several months ago that I was on called the ROE is the new ROI. So return on engagement. So we talk about building community, and that's really an essential part, I think, of where we're going. As an organization, as a leadership specialist, like I think part of the reality is creating cultures around your brand. So obviously eBay Luxury is doing this with your teams. A lot of the organizations that are here and my clients are doing it as well. But when you look at this literally, how are you doing this on a day-by-day basis in your lives? How are you creating this reality so that when you go forward, your teams can kind of believe in your mission and take action specifically towards advancing it? So we talk about courage and we talk about these opportunities to make a difference. And how often do you disagree? I usually use this measure. How often do you disagree with your boss? I hired someone to do branding for me, and I fired them pretty quickly because I realized they just said, great idea to everything I said. That's a great idea. I'm like, listen, I'm not hiring you to agree with me. I'm hiring you for your expertise. And I say this to CEOs, I coach CEOs around the world, and I say, listen, my job is not to tell you what you want to hear. You have plenty of people around you who will tell you that. My job is to tell you the truth. So if it's comfortable for you, great. If it's uncomfortable, which is far more likely, that's the reality, and that's why you pay me. So I think looking at the organization in that way, in a dynamic, moving way, looking at people who will subscribe still to the fake it till you make it, which I don't agree with at all. I think the reality is you have to kind of express and open up some vulnerability, because then that's the only way you're going to grow and develop as people. I look at this in a holistic way. If you're trying to, anybody familiar with the DISC assessment program, protocol? Okay. So I quite love it because it's 4 quadrants, and the way that I look at it is you look at the world as a party, as a business or organization, as a family, and as, I forgot the 4th one, the blue one. Anyway, so it's 2 scores, right? 1 score is who you are in reality in your life every day. The other score is your adapted score, who you are at work. And I do this with teams in a big scatter graph with 1,000 people in a room. And it's fascinating because if you have the team's true, authentic, who they are literally here, the distance between those 2 points, the farther the distance, the more difficult it is to be you every day. So when you look at these things, the whole goal is to have a closer alignment to who you are and what you do on a day-by-day basis. Is it blue sky? For some people it is. But my simple request for all of you and for all of us is if you're working in a way, not just a company and not just a role, but if your day-to-day work is so far from who you are as a person, please do yourself and the world a favor and get a different job. I mean, it's as simple as that. I've fired too many people, thousands and thousands of people in my life. And I said something once, and I really do stick with it. And my friend said, is this just making you feel better? I said, no. I need to give them a chance to be successful someplace else because they're not happy and successful here. And I've had people I fired come back to me years later and say that was the greatest thing that I did for them. It was like they would never have had the courage to leave. So I think it's an important thing to look at. Really assess, how are you finding your day-to-day job each day? Are you addressing your concerns with your boss? Do you have an open dialogue with your leadership, up and down and sideways, right? Are you just managing up? I see it all the time. Just people are great at managing up. They're terrible at managing their team. They're terrible with their peers, but they're great at kissing their boss's ass. It's a whole subgroup of people in every company. And right now, you're thinking about that person. You know that person. You know what I'm talking about. What a bitch. So it's just the reality of it. I'd like to do this sometimes. That person who you just don't know how they still have a job? How do they still have a job? I can't figure out what they do. I'll tell you something. COVID has been amazing for this. That sounds messed up. I lost family with COVID. I'm not trying to whitewash COVID. But there are some gifts, as I term them, gifts of COVID. And I think part of it is, I had a team meeting with a client of mine. The first Zoom call was 60 people on a Zoom. It was nuts. And then we had some emails back and forth, and then we had a core meeting afterwards, and there were 40 people. And we really didn't miss the other 20 people. And then we had a meeting again to get some decisions, and there were 20 people. And then I had a meeting with the board, and I said, where are these people? And he goes, I don't know. Like they were like, I don't know where they are. We didn't know what they did. Like so, entire levels of organizations were wiped out because they were not essential to making decisions and to carrying the organization forward. It's almost like I say to my teams and my leaders who are resistant to remote work. They're like, I see Stephanie. I know she's doing work. She's in the office. Stephanie's on her computer shopping, making travel reservations. But you know what? She's in the office. Yeah, she's there. I see her there. So the misassociation is that because she's sitting at her desk, she must be working. Or I could not even talk to you, but I saw you at the office today. Whereas if I call you and you could be working for 12 hours, I may call you when you're running to the pharmacy or to the bathroom and say, oh, Stephanie's always in the bathroom. Every time I call, she's going to the bathroom. So it's a very interesting reality and opportunity we have to look at how we lead organizations, how we really structure our own realities each day. What brings us productivity, productive time? What does it look like? I work at present across 7 time zones. So I just said to my client this morning, I said, just call me. Like, what if I said, just call me. I sleep barely, with one eye open. And that's by design, I do that. So either, if you know me, I am either always working, or if you catch me during one of my months in Bali, I'm never working, right? Because when you're working, I'm not as available. So it's a really interesting thing. You have to find your pace and your productive reality, and you have to find organizations that embrace that. And leaders have to look at their teams and say, you know what, Stephanie likes to work from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then she needs an hour. And then you like to work between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., and then you go to a Pilates class, and then you come back and you work from 10 p.m. to 12, or whatever it is. So I feel like everyone has to find their own rhythm with their teams, because we're all kind of conducting an orchestra, right? This is how I look at leadership, right? You're conducting an orchestra, and you have to make sure you have the right players. Who's in first chair? Maybe first chair needs a break. They have the pressure too much. Maybe they need to rotate out and bring someone else a chance to come up to this. I have a team creating a meeting for their top 11 people in the company, and they had the afternoon team booked to come in, like the N-2s, N-1s. And I said, well, what are they going to be doing in the morning when the top team is there? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I do know. They're going to be wondering, what the hell are you talking about that they can't be in the room for it? I said, you're flying them from all over the world to this meeting half a day, where you have their bosses in for half a day in the morning. Why not have everybody in the room for a full day? And you think this was like this revolutionary idea, like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'm like, well, no shit. I mean, like, they said, I don't know what they're going to be doing for that morning. I'm like, I do know. They're going to be having crazy thoughts about why couldn't they be in this conversation that you flew them across the world to. So think about some of the different decisions that you take. Think about the ways that you relate to one another and how honest you are. Leadership has changed dramatically. When I was starting out, I do believe there was an opportunity for people to be more open, but they didn't take it because any weakness, any chance of perceived, if not actual vulnerability, was perceived as weakness. Any opportunity to say, I'm not positive about something was perceived as weakness. Now, the one thing that scares me the most, every time I talk to a new client, if I have a leader that is positive about everything, I'm like, this is going to be a nightmare. Be a nightmare. So I think part of the trick for those of us that have been around for a while is to take the accumulated experiences and knowledge that we all have and hold them to us, but also realize that things are changing fast. Right? Things are changing dramatically, and things are changing in directions and ways that we couldn't have planned or imagined even just a few years ago. And that reality, I can promise you, as we sit here today in 2022, that reality is accelerating to a point of incomprehension right now. So the changes, and this is the shift to Web3 with my clients, and this is all I'll close on for now. The changes, the challenges of acting and being fearful and the risk of acting has quickly been eclipsed by the risks of inaction. And so I have a quote that I live and subscribe to, which is The Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt. And if you don't know it, I highly suggest you look it up. And it closes out by saying, it says, it's not the critic who counts, not the person who points out where someone strong stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who's in the arena, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great failures, successes, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls that knew neither victory nor defeat. So I think that leadership has had a chronic issue that I'm taking as a personal mission for the past 20 years of my career to change, and that make a decision, make something courageous as a decision, and then, critically important, take action towards making it happen. Because even if it doesn't happen, you learn much more by the movement towards that aspiration than you will by sitting still wondering if you're going to have another idea that you're not going to act on. So I have a great impatience for inaction. I'd rather you move and see and what happens and learn and grow and adapt. Agility is critical. And the only way you're going to really get to practice agility is by moving. Right? So it's I can talk about fitness and I can talk about other different aspects of different analogies I'll give you, but I look at it this way: unless you kind of I'm a big fan of hot yoga, so unless you get in the room, like stay in the room, right? It's 55 degrees Celsius, and I run hot, so I'm in the room for 2 minutes and I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna die here again. But unless you're in the room and have to adapt and put yourself into stressful situations, I do engineered discomfort for a living. I put teams and leaders into engineered, specifically purposeful discomfort because it's the only way change happens. So please, when you're in a situation to make a decision, when you're in a situation to take a leap, when you're in a situation to consider options, please don't shy away from that first reflex to say, I don't know about that one. Right? Oftentimes, the things that scare you most reflexively initially are the decisions that if you take, you will learn the most, you will grow the most, and you'll innovate the most for your companies. So, how's that? A little snapshot. That's all. Yes, yeah. Yeah, do you have a question? Yeah.
How the flexibility helps influence at work relationship?
How does flexibility help influence work relations?
You can, like, as a mother, you need some flexibility, or you have more commitments with more association. You have to balance your life with your work.
Well, there's several things, right, in what you're saying. So work-life balance is a whole separate reality. I'll give you an example. So I have a session I do in France, which the Franglish they use is our prides, or things we're proud of. And I had a very diverse group from Thales, a very big French everything company. I don't know. And this guy very quietly raised his hand and he said, I guess, I designed this radio and it's supposed to transmit for 6 weeks and it's been on Mars now for 5 years. And I'm like, wait, what? I was like, and you're tentatively doing this? So, and then what he did by opening that up, because engineers tend not to be the most boastful, prideful people in my experiences. He opened up the door for his other team to say, this is what I did that I'm proud of. And then we open it up to people in the group. What are you proud of having accomplished that's outside of work, right? So I think when you're open and you see people as whole people, right? I mean, did you ever when you were a kid, did you ever run into your teacher at the grocery store? Or the pharmacy or something, or the store, or the beach. It's weird. Just the context is nuts, right? You're like, you have legs? It's just very strange. So I think when you see your team as whole people, you're a far more effective leader, right? When you see your whole team, I know for me, I'm a divorced dad. My kids, when I started, I took a full-time job in 2004 with a global telecom company. I ran global operations, which turned into organizational development, which turned into running investor relations, public relations. It was crazy. At some point, I told my friend who's the CEO, I'm like, dude, I can't do this. I have 19 jobs. What are you doing to me? But part of my deal in taking that was on Wednesdays, I left at noon, and I worked from home every Friday in 2004, 5, 6. Because to me, he saw me as a whole person. He knew that I was going to be doing my work. I was available, but I also had a life, and I wanted to be able to do that. I think there's a way of balancing that with people that I think you'll get far more out of them. If your goal as a leader is to get the most productive outcomes for your business and the most successively increasing bottom lines, let's be real. You want teams that are engaged, that are committed to the pieces of their work that lend itself to your success. And in order to do that, you can't look at them as just cogs, right? I mean, like I've left companies that saw me in that way. I have a funny story. So I started a job. My boss said to me, you had 11 interviews for this job, 11. You had 10 votes for the job. I was the one you didn't have. I wanted somebody else. My first day, she told me this. 12 years later, as the COO of a consulting firm, the CEO, my friend, said, can you come here? I need you to respond to a resume we got. I said, what? So I went in. It wasn't part of my job. I went in. She goes, can you call this person and tell them we have no opportunities for them here? This was a good friend of mine who was the CEO of the company. And so I said, really? And she goes, I'm going to call on speakerphone. I didn't know what she was talking about. Then she handed me my old boss's resume. So I had to call the person who treated me like crap for a year and say, hey, I'm just calling from so-and-so company. Just want to let you know we received your resume. There's nothing here for you. And she's like, oh, okay. Can you keep it on file for the future? I said, no. And she said no. My boss goes, no. And I said, hey, it's Jonscott. And I just heard her voice go, So, I mean, I hate to say it, but just don't be a jerk. It's not that complicated. I kind of feel like some leaders go out of their way. I did a riff. You know what a riff is? Hopefully you don't. So I did a riff for a company I was advising, and they were selling pieces and moving. And the head of their institutional investing arm was a jerk. He was like a crazy Napoleonic, like 5 foot tall, crazy, arrogant guy. And he was like happy. He was like, oh, they'll find other jobs. They should get over it, be a grown up. He was a real jerk. So then the board directors met. I was at the board meeting. And guess who was decided to be fired? Him. And I said, oh, please, I'll do it for free. Let me go and talk to this guy. Because there's no reason for the behavior, right? There's no reason for that. If you see people as complete people who have flaws, who make mistakes, and who can learn and grow, if you're a supportive, encouraging leader in that way, you'll get far more out of your organization. I mean, we had a brief conversation about the blue check yesterday. And I mean, listen, if narcissism was a personality trait that leaders couldn't have, we would have very few organizations. So there's a certain balance of narcissistic personality disorder that I think is effective, and there's certain balances that destroy organizations. Where Twitter's going to go, I don't know. I'm watching with popcorn every day. It's fascinating. I have about 50 friends who lost their jobs. I mean, they have very nice stock buyouts, so I'm not really having a bake sale for them, but they'll be okay. But I think part of it is, seeing people as complete people, as whole people, I think is important. Because if you don't, they'll go someplace where they feel valued. It's not that complicated. I always used to say, if you paid me enough money, I don't care how you treat me. When I was a young kid, I was making $19,000 a year, so it didn't take a lot to me to feel valued. Say again?
You can say, find my strength and utilize me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a direct way, but I think it's also just a matter of, it's a cultural reality, right? Like, I spent a lot of time at Google in New York. I have a lot of friends. I've coached people there, executives there. And it's an interesting culture there, right? And I say this, I wrote an article last week about Dubai. And I'm not working for the Dubai Ministry of anything. But to me, there's a culture of excellence there, right? You go there to do your best. If you don't, you're gone. If you don't want to abide by the rules there's the airport. You're welcome to take the next flight back to where you came from. But if you want to, I've been in Dubai for 10 years, 11 years. If you want to succeed there, bring your best and try your best, because if you try to phone it in, there's 1,000 people working nonstop to surpass you. So I feel like it's a generative, exciting place. That's getting much better when it comes to seeing people holistically. Because I think the leadership in any organization, and not that Dubai's an organization, but in some ways, Sheikh Mohammed treats it like an organization. They want their teams he wants the people to be successful, he wants them to be healthy, and he wants to enable success. Are there flaws? Yes, I'm not going to. But I do think that there's interesting ways of looking at leadership in a way that's generative, in a way that's kind of honoring the people that come from. So, any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Yeah. From your experience, do you think there's a difference between family-run businesses, private companies? That's okay.
They can't hear you. Yep. Yeah.
Hi again. My question was, and transitioning from what you were saying about Dubai and the fact that it's a family-run company, do you feel that there is a difference in terms of reaction when you're dealing with executive from family-run companies and from quoted companies where they have quarterly reports and the pressure from the market?
Well, it's a great question. So when I was talking about Dubai, sorry, the lighting guys are mad. I was talking about Dubai as a country, but I'll give you the answer. So I work with a company in Turkey that when I first met them, I knew they were an old company, but I didn't realize that the 35-year-old kid, sorry, I'm old, kid I was meeting, was taking over a 700-year-old company of his family. Okay? It was like 17 generations. It was crazy. There's like a list, there's like a wall of photographs and paintings starting. You know, there was no photographs back then. So yeah, it changes everything when there's accumulated social pressure from your family and familiar pressure. I think the really important aspect of this is if you're, and let's talk about luxury, right? So I've worked in the fashion space since my first internship with Liz Claiborne in the late 80s. So from there to Ralph Lauren, to Kenneth Cole, to the consulting work I've done with LVMH and Givenchy and other brands around the world, Burberry, Prada. When your name's on the door and it's your company, there's an entirely different social construct at the company, unsurprisingly, right? When you look at the agility, let's look specifically at luxury and fashion. When you look at the agility and the way in which decisions are made, look at Gucci now, right? Gucci's run as a business. It's not a family business anymore, right? When you look at Prada, it's still run as a family business largely. Things are much slower to happen. Culturally, things are much slower to transpire. Same thing if you look at other brands. Like I think one of the most fascinating things in play right now is if LVMH buys Ralph Lauren. That's going to be fascinating. In my opinion, Ralph needs a refresh in a dramatic way. I'm excited to see if it goes. I'm excited for it to happen, frankly. But I do think that you have this reality where you have family-owned or the name is on the door, right, type of businesses, and then you have other businesses that are run by boards of directors. And again, it's a matter of, everyone's looking at the CEO or the department head or the head of the division, and the head of the division is looking at the CEO of the global organization, and the CEO of the global organization is looking at the board, and everyone's looking at the shareholder value. And so what are you making decisions for, right? I had a huge meeting a few years ago with a French, I'll say, water and yogurt company. And we have a session called No Taboos, and someone asked them, the CEO who was there, who I think was very courageous. I do this with all my groups. It's a segment called No Taboos, and you can literally ask the CEO anything. Now, it takes huge courage for a CEO to come up on stage. It's a center stage. There's 1,000 people around you, and people are just throwing mics. And people initially will be like, oh, how do you feel about our quarterly results next month? And then someone wants to just get on the mic so this person knows their face. And then they get emboldened by this over time. And someone goes, so let's be clear, we're not a water company, we're a plastic bottle company. How do you plan to address that? Boom, sits down. And I don't know who's following the news in France, but you'll see recently a CEO was let go because they were trying to move things forward in that way. So now what does that say to you about the next CEO? Is he or she going to be that innovative and try to push the envelope? No, because they're worried about their job, right? And the problem is, for older executives, I'll own this myself, we're at the point where we've probably had more time working than we have time left to work. Let's just say that conservatively, right? So as we do this and as we get farther down that road, and as our holdings and risk and accumulated assets become greater, we have more to lose. And as we're looking to change things and shake things up, we're checking our watches and saying, let's revisit it in 3 years. Because guess what? In 3 years, I'm out. I'm retiring. So it's a very tricky dance in organizations who have, right now we have many organizations with 4 or 5 generations of employees working collectively. So how you motivate someone who's in their early 50s like me or how you motivate my son who's in his mid-20s, big difference, right? How you motivate someone who's values freedom and autonomy above all else is very different than someone who likes to work, just have a task, be an individual contributor. They're amazing. And I say this all the time. You know that person. You know the person I'm talking about in your organization. They don't really like to talk too much, but if you give them something to do, they'll sit there and laser focus on it until it's done. I hope you know that person because they're valuable to companies. But how you motivate these teams it's very much like an orchestra. As I say, I think you have to be ready to adapt. You have to be ready to see the person as a complete person. So yeah, family businesses where the person's name's on the door, larger publicly held organizations. These are all it's all nuance, right? It's all that's why leadership is art and science. I've read a lot of books over the years, and many of them that are most impactful for me and what I feel like impacts my clients the most are not leadership books. They're just kind of sociological or books about being a human being. I love this one book by Thich Nhat Hanh I talk about all the time. It's called Silence, The Power of Quiet in a World Full of Noise. I have it on audiobook. I've had to listen to this book 50 times. It's amazing. And I find for me, my clients say to me, you have a calming way of approaching things. And I think to myself, yeah, that took a lot of chaos to get to, and when you think about this, if you're an entrepreneur, and I would imagine many people here are, in one way, shape, or form, whether they're internal or external to an organization, if you haven't lost everything, and I feel badly for you, and that may sound crazy, but when you risk for something you believe in, and you lose, and you learn, and you adapt, and you try again, and you see the learning you can take, I would never. I talk about this, and I'll ask you to say this within yourself. Think about for you the best, worst thing that happened to you. Right? What's the best, worst thing that happened? What went so wrong at some point for you that you couldn't imagine recovering from? That right now, if you could go back, you wouldn't change. So I think that informs a lot of who we are as people as we go forward. It informs for me a lot. I have nothing to lose. I come from a father who was on welfare with his family, who saved up his money working from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning to buy back the pocket watch his mother gave his father, then sold when his father died at 15. Who was working after he went into the Air Force and who decided, and I think about this, he used to lecture me on risk. He goes, you're too risky, you're taking a bigger risk, you're flying where, what are you doing? And I said, Dad, for real. I said, you were married for 2 years, you're in your 20s, you bought a new house, a new car, you're expecting a baby, and you quit your job and started a consulting business in 1968. And he laughs because my dad started a business the year I was born. I was born in 69. He started a business that year, and the year after he bought his house, his income was 8 times the price of the house he just bought. He went from a $6,000 salary to a $180,000 salary in a year, right? So I come from that level of, you don't know, right? You don't know unless you take the leap. So, one of the things I can say is I come from a very ambitious, if not crazy, entrepreneurial stock. But I also know where I came from. So I think you have to be ready to take a leap and ready to fail and ready to go again. I think resilience is immensely important. I can talk about resilience for hours. I purposely put myself in situations where I'm going to have to be resilient because I think it's a muscle you have to exercise. I have a shirt that says, comfort wants you dead. If you're making the safe decision all the time, business, life, in every way you can, comfort. If you're looking for comfort, please don't. In business, in life, it's a trap. So I tend to go to the extreme, where I'm yelling at my legs to move in mile 17 at the end of an Ironman in the marathon. You got to move. We didn't get all the way here to stop. So I think there's a lot of ways we can adapt to this reality, but we have to put ourselves intentionally not unsafely. I'm not saying, jump out of a plane without a parachute and try to solve the problem on the way down. I'm saying put yourself into situations where it's not comfortable, where the business that you're looking to, what would be interesting? If you say, and I will promise I'll stop now. If you find yourself at the intersection, if it's a Venn diagram and it's a pretty large overlap of terrified and excited about the same thing, please do it. If you are equally terrified and excited about it, right? That to me, that is my go time. As soon as I get to that point, this is going to be crazy. I'm a little terrified. This is really exciting. I got to try this, listen, I've made mistakes. I've dated people in wrong places and traveled, and I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. I was equally excited and terrified at the same time. But the reality is, that's where change happens. And more so, that's where magic happens, right? It is. Because otherwise, you're going to be those cold and timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat. That's all. I'm done. Great. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jonscott. It was really amazing. And for once, I'm going to stay quiet, silent. We're just going to make a short break of 15 minutes. Thank you very much.